From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO, a daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Tuesday, November 14th. I'm Erin O'Toole. A lot of Coloradans consider themselves environmentalists and love the idea of recycling. But let's be honest, our recycling habits are pretty trashy. In 2020, the rate of recycling statewide was just 15%, less than half of the rate nationwide. That's according to a report from the Colorado Public Interest Research Group and EcoCycle. And when it comes to plastics recycling, one of the most important materials to divert from water and landfills, that report found our rate there was even lower. And maybe that's because the actual practice of recycling can be so confusing. In honor of America Recycles Day tomorrow, we're doing a little recycling of our own, listening back to our October conversation with Mark Snedeker, who directs recycling operations for Waste Management of Colorado, which now goes by the initials WM. Let me start by asking you, what are we doing wrong when it comes to recycling? Most of us really want to do the right thing and keep as much as we can out of the landfill, but sometimes it's complicated. What are some of the biggest recycling blunders you're seeing from your waste management perch that keep you up at night?
You know, it's the wish cycling. When you go through, whoever's providing your recycling services, they have a list of acceptable items. You know, typically it's cardboard, paper, milk containers, laundry jugs, your water bottles, those kind of the generalities. And those who I would encourage people to check and see what's included in their local streams. One of the biggest things you get is people are like, I don't understand. I've got this multi-flexible packaging thing, and I don't know if it's recyclable or not. I'm going to drop it in the can and hope it gets recycling, and they'll take care of it. Unfortunately, what happens when they wish cycle something, that same item that should have just gone in the garbage the first time winds up taking a really long trip to the same landfill, but it just tends to gum up the process and adds cost all the way along the way, and tends to sometimes even cause, harm to some of our employees.
You mentioned that gumming up the works if people engage in wish cycling, which I love, and I'm stealing that. If people do throw trash into a recycling bin, does it mess up the whole batch?
It can. It really depends on, on what it is. Because if you throw for example, even if you've got a milk jug that's half full of milk, it's like you don't empty it, you throw that in there. And when we go through, when it hits our process and our floors, all that material that's in there, that milk's going to spill all over everything else. And if it gets onto the paper and it makes a paper wet, it gives a paper a bad smell, then we can't really recycle that paper. And we potentially could have to throw out exponentially amounts of, besides just a little bitty wet paper, because we bale everything into things that weigh close to a ton.
Wow. Well, and then my next question is, where does our recycling go? What happens with those giant 1-ton bales you just mentioned?
After you drop it in the curb at your house or off at your local recycling center, we process it. And processing, we'll put it through a series of screens, optical sorters, really cool things to get everything into its own individual product type. And then, so our cardboard or old corrugated cardboard, OCC in the recycling world, your Amazon boxes, those go to various mills throughout the U.S., off to the Midwest. We ship some stuff down into Mexico, and it gets made back into cardboard boxes. Paper goes off to become liner board, new Kleenexes, paper towels, things like that. The plastics for WM, we don't ship any plastics overseas. We always try to find the highest and best use of an end market that meets our strict standards, making sure that it's not going to wind up harming the environment someplace down the road because it's been mismanaged.
That's interesting. And that makes me think about plastic recycling in general. I mean, here in the U.S., we've been led to believe it's okay to use as much plastic as we want because it's going to be recycled. But we've heard recent investigations from NPR and PBS that found it's not happening. Less than 10% of plastics get recycled here. Can you just talk about why that is? Is it the cost to recycle, or is it something else?
I think it's more of a consumer behavior. For example, at our Franklin Street MRF in Denver, Colorado, where we recycle, tons and tons of plastic, we have optical sorters that can go out and they can do 600 picks a minute where they can sort out today's water bottles and get them into a bale and get them reused again. So plastic's highly recyclable, but it's more consumer behavior. Are you taking the time to make sure you get it into that single stream bin to get it recycled, or are you doing the right things with it, or are you going to go ahead and just I'm just going to drop it in the garbage and I'll just go on to the next one. So,
Okay, and so how important is it for us then to look at those little numbers that are in the recycling arrow symbols?
it's a good generality. And, as long as it's got those chasing arrows onto it, we always tell people, because if you start trying to figure out, is this one in there or this one's not, it's a lot easier for us to sort those out because we do it via optical sorters. So we're using artificial intelligence, the latest technologies of near vision and infrared vision to identify the various types of plastics and separate those out automatically, where we don't have to put a human element to that one. We can sort those out, and we'll do that for you.
All right. Well, last question for you, Mark. We know recycling is a little bit trickier sometimes, and it's more expensive generally for people than tossing things in the trash. The ideal scenario is aiming to generate less waste overall. Do you have any recommendations in that regard? Maybe something you do in your own life to kind of shrink your waste footprint?
That's a great question, because the common thing people always ask is, what can I do to be a better recycler? And I always tell people, make smarter purchasing decisions. So when you have a choice between something that may be in an HD package, or instead of a multi-layer foil package, or even a glass package, understand that glass is infinitely recyclable, and in the state of Colorado can be back into a beer bottle in less than 2 weeks. If you get that multi-layer pack and it's not recyclable, that's going to wind up into the landfill itself. So if you make those decisions to buy the highly recyclable packaging varieties, what you're doing is you're pulling that material through the system. So you create a demand from the producers that say, well, I'm selling much more of product X because it's got a better recyclable package into it, as opposed to product Y. So they're pulling product X through the system instead of us trying to push the recycled material there.
Okay. So thinking about the kind of packaging you're purchasing not only can help you in your own recycling, but it could even drive manufacturers to create more of the packaging that is more easily recyclable.
That is 100% correct. You've simplified my words excellently on that one, Erin.
I love this because I think so many of us want to do what we can. This feels like a little piece of empowering information that our decisions as individuals really can make a larger impact. Well, Mark Snedeker, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for your time, Erin.
And back to those down in the dumps recycling rates I mentioned, a new state law could help address them. It requires companies making certain packaging to fund a statewide program that recycles those materials. That's it for us today here on In the NOCO. We'll be back with a brand new episode tomorrow, discussing some of the barriers Coloradans encounter when trying to find mental and behavioral health services. Our executive producer is Robin Vincent. I'm your host, Erin O'Toole. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.